Hello there, movie buffs. My name is Steve, aka NJMovieFreak, and this is the second podcast episode. And today, next to me, I have my buddy here, Rob Benny. Rob, say hi.
Hey, what's up?
Now, Rob and I have known each other for what, close to 10 years now?
Yep.
Wow.
Maybe longer. Probably like 14 or 15 years.
What? I'm gonna say you're right, because I remember when I started at Barnes & Noble, that's actually where we met. We met at Barnes & Noble in Clifton, New Jersey. You were working in the cafe, and I was in the music department.
Yeah, that's right. I remember I used to walk by the music, and I used to always be poking around, shuffling through the thousands of albums that they had there back when it was actually a music department and not just some music tech department where you have like 5 albums, 2 vinyls, and a million different USB cords. Well, and you approached me, and we just started chatting about just some of our favorite bands and movies, and I noticed we just had a lot of things in common, so we just sort of became friends from there.
Yeah. What's interesting about Rob and I is that we actually have a mutual friend. His name is Ricky Franco, and he runs the Cherry Blossom Players. Name drop.
There you go.
In Nutley. We did a play recently, a couple of years ago actually, called The Wedding Singer.
That's right. Wow, that was a great experience. A crazy experience, but still great.
Very crazy. I'm not much of a singer, so when the director of the show, Yasmin Yarrow, she's also a very good friend of mine, asked me to be one of the people in the play, I was like, oh yeah, sure, I love The Wedding Singer. Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, come on, it's a great film. And then she said, can you sing? No. I mean, if you want me to sing, I'll be like a backup singer or like somebody in the back that like kind of chimes in when the time calls for it, but I'm not a singer. And she goes, I have this part that'd be great for you. And I go, what's that? She's like, the boyfriend, Glenn Juliet Glenn. I'm like, yeah. She's like, I think you would be good as him. So I auditioned for the part of Glenn Juliet, and I got the part. So when I auditioned for Glenn Juliet, I just felt that character. I'm not a dick in real life, but I just felt that, if I can be that way on stage for, was it 5 days that play was?
Yep.
Wow. Those were 5 excruciating days, too, let me tell you. Yasmin says, oh, by the way, you have a solo. What? She's like, yeah, you're going to have to sing a solo. I'm like, no. Can we just cut that part? Can we just cut that part? She's like, no. So I was a little afraid to do that because, number one, I'm not a singer. Number two, hell no, I'm not going to do so. If you want me to go up there and do comedy for an hour, that's fine. I can do comedy. But for singing solo, I can't do that.
Yeah, right.
But she pushed me, and she gave me some vocal lessons, taught me how to breathe properly, which I still have to learn because as I'm speaking, I'm kind of like, ugh, because I'm like going so fast. But Rob here actually got involved in it too. You were, what was your character's name?
I played Sammy in the play, and I also was the music director at the time as well. See, I was approached originally just to be the music director for the play because there was a few issues that happened, and long story short, their music director left the play, and so I replaced the part. At the same time, we were short on actors, so she asked if it would be possible if I could audition for the role of Sammy. And I auditioned for the role, and they basically came to me a day later and said, okay, you have the part. Now, I've never acted in my life, and I never really had much intention of ever being an actor in theater or on movies or TV.
But you've been on stage so many times because you're a singer.
Yeah, I've sung and I've played instruments and music on stage and keyboards and guitars. And so I have experience in playing in front of an audience, but I've noticed theater is a very, very different experience than it is simply just by being a musician. When you're a musician, you're just up there playing songs and you're getting into a series of songs, and every song is usually different from one another. However, when you're in theater, you're not only performing songs, you're actually engaging in spoken word and you're portraying a character. And you have to be very, very precise in your diction and very, very precise in how you portray your character. You have to be very believable. Now, being a good actor in any format is not easy. I mean, people spend years and thousands of dollars taking acting classes. I've never taken an acting class in my life, so I was going with very low expectations, thinking that this is just for fun and that I'd, just get by with this. And if I even did an okay job at the acting part, I'd be more than happy. But I've never actually aspired to be an actor. It's just never really been in my blood. I feel like you have to have a certain charisma and an it factor to be an actor that is different than that of just being a musician. You know, there's a definite difference and distinction. You have to have a certain charm about you to be an actor that you don't necessarily need as a musician in all areas of music. At the same time, I still thought it was a fun, very good learning experience, and I enjoyed every bit of it.
I just want to talk about some of the bloopers that we encountered doing this play. For instance, I can remember, like it was yesterday, opening night. I was very nervous. And, I mean, I've been on stage before, and I've done acting for camera and whatnot, but this was a musical, and it was my first. So I was hoping, we had, remember, it was like a sold-out crowd, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was packed. So I remember we were in the kitchen. That's where we all hung out before, you know, they played the intro for the music. And I'm just thinking, like, okay, we're going to get through this. We're going to be all right. And, yeah, let's just do this. Let's hit the ground running. So everything was going great until, I don't remember the song exactly, but it was a song about me proposing to Julia. Now, I'm supposed to open up a box prop and show her this fake ring. And she's supposed to be like, oh, God, oh, yes, of course. But I couldn't open the box.
Oh,
and when
I
remember. I was mid-sentence in the song, and that's when I realized that the box was backwards. I'm trying to pull it, and it's not opening.
Oh, man.
So I finally open it, and the thing flies off. I don't know who saw in the audience, but it flies off under the chair. And I grab it, and I kind of like go, here you go, you know. So the song ends. I grab the prop off the floor. I go into the back, and all the actors are changing for the next scenes. I take the prop, and I throw it against the wall. I'm like, freaking prop failure! I threw it against the wall. I was so pissed.
Oh, man, that's the worst. When things like that happen, it makes the experience very tense and very nerve-wracking, but looking back, it just becomes very funny.
What about you?
I could think of a million things, a million different bloopers that went on with the music cues, certain points where I had to like literally like just kind of like line things up during the rehearsals, and when the play happened, there'd be parts where I would just come in like a second too early or a second too late, but it would be so noticeable. And I'd be like, in my mind, I'd be dying inside because I know I messed up, but I tried to keep my face as straight as possible. But looking back, if I could do it all over again, I would be like, okay, I'm going to rehearse this for another good maybe 2 weeks before I even think about getting up on stage.
One of the actresses, she had a problem projecting, right?
Correct.
So we were always like, project! The back of the audience has to hear you.
And that's the thing, you know, and looking at it on both sides, it's you think about it, you're in a small theater, and music comes so loud in a small theater because the acoustics are not always up to snuff. So I can understand it's much harder for anyone to project that loud and still stay on key. And I could totally understand the insecurities that some singers may have and some actresses or actors may have in such a small setting. So I can, you know, thinking about it, I can give a free pass to someone who doesn't have that ability to overcome that music sound.
Right.
On the same token, when you're at a play and you're at the night of the performances, you get frustrated, and it's easy to get frustrated because you're thinking you've had a lot of time to do this and you've had a lot of time to make these adjustments, so, you know, why not think a little bit more about working on those adjustments more in depth rather than just winging it.
For my performance, I remember just changing like 5 or 6 different times because I had a suit that I had to wear in every other scene. I had a suit. Sometimes in between scenes, I would have maybe 4 or 5 minutes if I was lucky. So I'm backstage like a kid in the dark trying to get his clothes on. Just like, come on, okay, I got the tie on, I got the wig on. The time I go on stage, I have no idea what I look like. There's no mirror, and I'm just looking at my co-stars like, do I look okay? Do I look ragged? It's like, hey, you look fine. Go ahead, you're good. And I would just go out there and just go with it.
Yeah.
You're constantly frazzled because some of these scenes are just, and because you can't really hear in the back, we had to crack the door a little bit, which is actually what you're not supposed to do. But because we couldn't hear it, I had to crack the door to hear my music cue in order for me to go on. Just like you say, you might go on too early, you might go on too late, and I was so afraid of doing that.
I will say one of the funniest moments was when at the very last night we were doing the final number, the music cut out and the audio engineer yelled, "Jesus!"
I remember that. Yeah,
that was so funny. and the audience, I guess, was just... I saw people in the corner of their eyes looking around like, what the hell? Like, what's this all about? But honestly, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything because it was a fun time. You know, we worked with some very cool, interesting characters. It came together very well in a very short time. And considering that community theater is supposed to be a fun experience where you're doing it for the love and passion for performing arts, you know, I think it all came together as good as it could have.
I have to agree with that. We're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about one thing that, you know, one of the things that we have many things to come, but one of the things that Rob and I, you know, agree upon a lot of is horror films. And I mean, I can watch them all year. It doesn't matter if it's summer, winter, Christmas. It doesn't matter. I can watch them any time of year, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll look at Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Yes, I mean, that's a classic.
That's such a classic. The second one's even better.
Garbage Day! Huh? No!
I think that was the only thing that guy was famous for after that movie.
Oh, I know.
I remember seeing him at a convention, and he had that still shot of him in the movie, and like that face.
It was brilliant.
That was brilliant. Yeah, he's probably heard 100 times. Like even walking down the street, I can imagine people saying, "Hey, Garbage Day!"
Oh, of course.
But you know what? Hey, even if that's the only film you did, or maybe the few films that you did, you're still recognized, and that's pretty cool.
I totally agree.
So Rob and I, we put our heads together, and we got a table at the NJ HorrorCon at the Showboat in Atlantic City. And that was actually, you know what? Today's October 13th. Last year on October 13th, it was our third day at the convention. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember it. It was a great time. We stayed at the Showboat, and the convention was right downstairs in the Showboat, so it was great. The convention was very, very well done, and the outline and layout from downstairs to upstairs was just impeccable.
I remember because a couple of years ago, I actually went there for a Back to the Future reunion, which I actually talked about in the last podcast. If you want to check out my last podcast, I do talk about a mini Back to the Future reunion. They had everything on what used to be the casino floor. It was really cool because it's such a huge space that everybody was, you know, spread out nicely, and people weren't overcrowding in the middle. Even with the vendors, because vendors usually take up a lot of room and they have their own rooms themselves, but the way they laid it out was very strategic, and I have to give them props for that. And when we did it last year, everything was on the second floor, so where the buffet used to be in the Showboat, it's like a hallway, a very long hallway, and we were like, the second or third table, right?
Yes.
So as people were walking into the convention, we were like right there, like one of the first vendors people saw. So that was actually a pretty good spot to be.
Absolutely. We had the pleasure to meet some people and network with some individuals who were really cool along the way as well.
I mean, I was starstruck. I mean, I've been on a few movie sets and commercials, but I was very starstruck because Christina Ricci, she had her table down in where the buffet used to be, which was like probably 50 feet from us, like in the front. And she walked by with her entourage, and I was like, "Oh, Christina Ricci's here. She saw my Casper."
Nice.
And Rob's looking at me like, "You okay, man?" I'm like, I'm sorry. I like Christina Ricci. She's a Jersey chick. I can't help it, you know?
There you go.
No, it was a really good experience because this was your second time doing the convention, right?
Well, it was my first time doing the NJ HorrorCon, whereas previously I've done the Chiller Theater Expo several times in Parsippany, New Jersey.
Oh, that's right. Because when we did it a couple of years ago, they had the bomb threat.
Yes, that's right. That was ridiculous. It happened on that Saturday afternoon where there was a call that there was a bomb threat and the place had to be evacuated. And they didn't call anyone back till about 8 p.m. at night. But by that time, we were just so disillusioned and frustrated that I wound up going the next day, just packing everything up and went home because there was literally no traffic coming in. There was nobody there on Sunday. It was a mere fraction of what it would have been if it was just a normally run convention without any bomb scares or any of that other nonsense.
Yeah, because you have two types of people that go to conventions. You have the people that go for the autographs, and you have the people that go for the vendors. And the vendor people were already there Friday night and Saturday for most of the morning. So on Sunday, I mean, it's pretty much a wash because most of the celebrities are gone by Saturday night. If you look at the website where they post the celebrities, a lot of them don't stay until Sunday. So that's kind of a wash for them. And the vendors, I just feel bad for you guys because it's like all that money is just gone.
That definitely, without a doubt. And not to mention, I mean, you're already playing for a tough crowd when you're starting as a vendor. Even if you've been there 4 or 5 times, you're still a newcomer in town compared to individuals who have been doing this for 20 to 30 years on their product. So, I mean, I've been doing this for about 7, 8 years, and even so, it's still a very slow, gradual process to build up an audience of individuals to either sell your product to or to network with. Nevertheless, I still enjoy every moment of it because you never know who you're going to meet, and you never know how many great connections you're going to encounter, and you never know, you might even make a friend or two here and there along the way.
Absolutely. Last year when we had the table, I met these 2 people that were at the table next to us, Tammy and her husband Paul.
Yes.
And they do a lot of cosplay, like steampunk cosplay, and they also wrote books.
Yeah.
They were very nice people. I'm actually still friends with them to today on Facebook.
Me too.
I talk to them all the time. And they're doing very well for themselves. They're featured in magazines. They're featured in books. I'm very glad we got to meet them. It's a really cool connection. Getting to the nitty-gritty of the convention scene, Rob, we had one table. It was like, 6 feet table? 6 foot table?
Mm-hmm.
We had a 6 foot table, and we divided it in half. Half of it was for East Coast Thrills and East Coast Thrills films, which were my films, and then Rob was next to me promoting his CDs.
Yes, I was promoting my project under Cucurbitophobia. Now, Cucurbitophobia is exclusively a horror-themed dark ambient music project. Now, dark ambient, to most people, is just noise or drone music, but I incorporate more dark classical and avant-garde musical influences that are reminiscent of film scores of horror films of the past. Everything from 50s through 80s horror films has been my largest influence, so much of my musical output reflects that. So back to the convention, I would be selling my CDs in packages, and I'd also be selling a signature Haunted House t-shirt that captures the logo and the ambiance that I tried to portray with my project.
You know, my mother wore that the very next day. She got it.
Yes, I remember.
My mother, my father, and my aunt went down to Atlantic City. I believe it was on Saturday. We were there that day, and we were hungry, and because it's very expensive to eat at the show, but there was like maybe 2 places open.
Yes.
And it was off season, October, so there was like nothing on the boardwalk open. So my mother, she popped in to say hi, how's everything going? And she went to go look at all the celebrities and do some guerrilla shooting.
There you go.
Which I did reference in my last podcast. Check that out. And she came back and offered us if we wanted any sandwiches. So she was very nice to go get us sandwiches, and I'll always remember that. That was cool.
Absolutely.
Saturday night, you and I remember after we packed up, we went down to the boardwalk and we had some pizza.
Yeah, could never go wrong with New Jersey boardwalk pizza. That stuff is amazing.
It really is, and especially if it's from anywhere such as Seaside, Kingsburg, Atlantic City, Ocean City. They have some of the best pies. I mean, You could be from New York, you could be from Chicago. I'm sorry. I'm born and raised in New Jersey. Pizza, I love the pizza here.
Oh, yeah. And of course, New Yorkers will always say that New York pizza is always better than New Jersey and vice versa. I think it's all great. As long as it's the tri-state area, New Jersey, New York, southern Connecticut, some parts of Pennsylvania, by Philly, you can't go wrong with the pizza in this whole upper East Coast area, in the Mid-Atlantic.
No, we got it down pat. I mean, we know how to make that pie. Rob is a very talented musician. I mean, this guy could play keyboards, he could play bass, guitar. Do you play drums too?
I can play drums. I haven't played drums because I've never had the ability to have a drum kit in my living conditions, from even when I lived with my parents to where I'm living now with my fiance. We just never had the space to accommodate a drum kit, so I've always worked with electronic drum loops, and I've done percussion via MIDI software.
Now, Rob was very nice to provide me with a lot of the music that he's made over the years, and I have to say, it's quite remarkable. And Cucurbitophobia, I know I just butchered that, didn't I?
No, it's okay. It's all good.
It's a very hard pronunciation. I'm trying my best. That music is very impressive because, as we were talking about before, with horror movies, I love the soundtrack behind horror movies because it just adds a sense of suspense to the movie. And I want to see what else Rob can do. So when I did the theme park documentaries, East Coast Thrills and East Coast Thrills 2, I gave him the challenge of composing a soundtrack for me. I had him watch both films and get a feel of what the rhythm was in the movie. And I have to say, what he pumped out for those soundtracks was amazing. I mean, it definitely captured all the scenes that I pictured it would capture. I mean, the highs and lows of the documentary, the depressing parts, the upbeat parts. I mean, you are a phenomenal musician, Rob. It's amazing.
Well, thanks, Steve.
Him and I are sort of like John Williams and Spielberg, or Danny Elfman and Tim Burton. I mean, he's my go-to guy when it comes to soundtracks. This guy can do anything.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, and I feel like the chemistry we've always had has never been compromised by any other external factors. It's always just worked.
Exactly. And Rob, in fact, Rob was in the East Coast Thrills too.
Yep, I got an interview segment on the Coney Island feature, which I talked all about my experiences of going to Coney Island, some of my favorite attractions at Coney Island, as well as just the overall atmosphere that I've always come to love and cherish.
All right, Rob, it's October, so you know what that means, right?
Halloween, horror, all the great stuff.
Time to talk about our favorite horror movies.
Absolutely. I love everything. I mean, I've grown up from when I was young watching the classics like House of Wax and House on Haunted Hill by Vincent Price. You know, going deeper into the horror of the black and white era, I love Psycho by Hitchcock. Love The Birds. You know, going even further back, I love Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, The Mummy, The Wolfman. All the legendary monster films that emerged. All the classics that emerged from the golden age of horror. Let's not forget about Nosferatu, you know, the Godfather vampire.
Yeah, the start of the whole Dracula scene.
Yes. Let's also talk about, you know, some of the later films when we get to the 70s. Halloween, Michael Myers, the true, like, iconic slasher figure that has, you know, inspired generations of horror movies from so on.
Absolutely. I mean, Michael Myers murdered his sister at a very young age, then was taken to an asylum where he pretty much was underneath the care of Dr. Loomis. And Dr. Loomis, you know, studied him for over a decade he studied him, and he still can't figure out what he is. But what he does know is that he's pure evil. He escapes, and he goes after his sister Lori. And this movie, I mean, it is a true slasher. Even though it's very cheesy for its time, it had moments where you didn't need blood and gore. It was just the tension. That single piano key, dun dun,
yes,
dun dun. It's the fear of impending doom
of course
that made you run and, you know, grab the blankets and go underneath them. You know, and then that's what's great about it, is because it's really good writing and you have music that pushes that.
Absolutely. Like, I think Halloween, the original first Halloween, and Psycho, for example, those two movies did not have a lot of gore, but they were groundbreaking for their time. They were way ahead of their time, and people were terrified when they saw these movies in the theaters. I mean, by nowadays standards, as you said, they may be tame or they may be hokey, but it would be great injustice to neglect just how influential these films were when they first came out at the time period that they did.
Well put. I mean, these were a springboard for all the 80s slashers as well. I mean, you got Nightmare on Elm Street. You got all the Jason movies. You got, what's that cheese? Sleepaway Camp. Sleepaway Camp. Felicia Rose, man. Every time I think about the movie, I just see the scene I can see the scene in my head at the end where they find out that she's a boy, and just the way her teeth just show and her mouth is open. It's just really creepy.
It was very shocking at the time period. I mean,
yeah.
By nowadays standards, it would be much more, it would be very politically incorrect for a lot of audiences, and it wouldn't hit well with a lot of people, which I completely understand. But at the time period, in that framework, it was something very different that people weren't in the know of, so they were very shocked and disturbed at that. And perfect for an 80s B movie.
Now, the thing about Halloween is there was so many movies in that franchise, but the one that stands out right now that I can think of that you mentioned the other day on Facebook was Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which had nothing to do with the franchise whatsoever. And a lot of the reviews at first were very bad, but looking back at the film, I watched it when I was very young and I didn't understand it. Now, I watched it again a couple of years ago and realized that it was a movie ahead of its time. You had to really think about what the message was, and there was a lot of subliminals in that movie.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're discussing just the concept of Silver Shamrock, when they're handing out the masks where people are running to the stores to grab these masks and to turn the TV on at that specific time of night, to see their brains rotting and being devoured by worms and maggots and other sorts of insects, it disturbs you, but it also paints a picture of a very metaphorical subliminal message of just how society can be controlled and programmed in such a deep way without even anyone being the wiser.
A film like this, it's not that gory either. I mean, there are some shock factor moments in the movie, but it's very psychological.
Oh, absolutely. And I've done a little research on it, and what I've learned is that John Carpenter wanted to make the Halloween movies like an anthology. He wanted to make Seasons of the Witch as like another movie to break away from the Michael Myers character to start producing anthology films in a similar way that Stephen King would. So Halloween 3 would have been Season of the Witch, and then there'd be another Halloween movie based on a different story to continue that tradition. Unfortunately, since at the time period the reviews were so critically bad, and that since, even though the film profited well, that he decided to resurrect Michael Myers for Halloween 4, which, it was a solid film in its own right, but I feel like bringing back the legacy afterwards, I feel like negates and sort of undermines just how brilliant Halloween 3 was in its own right.
And the guy who plays Dr. Daniel Chalice, that was Tom Atkins, who was also in The Fog and Night of the Creeps. And speaking of John Carpenter, did you see the little Easter egg towards the end of the movie where I think he's at a gas station or something?
Yes,
and he's watching Halloween on the television?
Yep, that's right.
That was like a little Easter egg for the fans out there.
That was a wink and nod. I mean, I've had conversations with others, and many of us have agreed that if the movie had come out without the Halloween title, if it was just a movie that stood alone on its own right, it would have been much more critically accepted, and it would have probably gotten a different spin by viewers at the time. By nowadays standards, with the younger generations, the Generation Z and younger millennials, many of them have embraced Halloween 3 as a brilliant film in its own right, giving it a much better reputation and a much better legacy than the Generation X and Baby Boomer crowds have.
Going back to what you were talking about with the subliminals and how, watching TV, and it's a very dark undertone about how it causes our society. We watch TV, it literally does cause our brains to rot. Another thing about subliminals is when it comes to brainwashing, this goes back to the CIA MK Ultra program, which was back in the 60s. It was done in a lot of TV programs too. That's what they call it, a program. Is every so often in the movie you would hear or you would see the Silver Shamrock commercial, and it sticks into your head. It's that spaced repetition that causes the brainwash.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
A lot of these are used by marketing companies to use to influence people. A lot of these are used by influencers in modern day generations on various social media platforms for different intents and purposes for each reason, of course. But the common factor is manipulation or bringing people together, for good or for evil purposes. Some of these are used for evil purposes, but people have also used these for good purposes as well. I mean, never underestimate the power of subliminals, and the influence they can have on any amount of people.
We have to talk about Hellraiser.
Hellraiser's amazing.
I'm going to be honest with you. When I first saw Hellraiser, I thought it was a drama because it's such a slow burn. But everything leading up to the appearance of the Cenobites and Pinhead made it so much worthwhile, being older and watching this movie a few more times. There's this artistry about Clive Barker. And Clive Barker, he's got a very dark mind. He's done figurines, he's done comic books.
He's done the anthology books to Books of Blood as well, which have some great stories in there as well.
You come across a puzzle box, and, well, illegally, because that's what these people are doing, and we're getting from dealers, black markets. You open it, and you pretty much unleash the gates of hell. So you made your bed, now you got to sleep in it. It's amazing that this film has lasted over like 33 years now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got elements of horror. It's got very, very deep elements of the macabre with gore, and it also has a very strong BDSM element to it as well that a lot of people in the fetish community have also, seen as a wink and nod.
It's got so many great lines, too, like, "We'll tear your souls apart," or, "Oh, no tears, child. It's a waste of good suffering." Just so many great lines in that movie.
Hellraiser himself, he's almost poetic in a way, the way he delivers his lines.
He
He delivers them in such a prolific manner and in such a smooth yet very malicious manner that it sends a chill down your spine every time you hear him speak.
And from what I understand, the film was made on such a strict budget that when they did the film, they thought it was going to be a total bomb because they didn't have enough money to finish it, and the costumes were expensive as it is. And by the time they got to actually film it, they were out of money, so they pretty much had the script to work with. But, for that time, I would have to say now it's a masterpiece.
And it worked well, and I've heard some say that the sequel, Hellraiser II, Hellbound, is even better than the first one. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I'm kind of indifferent about it because both films have great things about them. I will say the second one is more gory than the first one.
Absolutely,
Definitely a lot more of the BDSM in there. What I do like is the whole element of the Leviathan, which is not the sea monster, but it's the puzzle box as an entity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it kind of sheds light on, this dimension and the next, and where Hellraiser and his Cenobites reside, and that's like in the netherworld, in the middle there. Not quite hell, but not quite heaven.
Yeah, I mean, for those who are religious, it almost is synonymous to a purgatory-like state or a limbo-type state.
Right. And sort of like the Wishmaster, he'll give you anything you want, but in return, he'll give you pleasure, but pleasure to what he thinks is pleasure, which is pain.
Yes, everything comes with a price.
Exactly. If you're going to trade your soul, you better know what you're getting into.
Yes. Now, being a fan of the Wishmaster movies, I've seen the first three, and I've loved them. They get very funny and very corny at times, but just the cleverness of the Wishmaster, just the way he goes about delivering the people's wishes in such a sadistic and yet, very contradictory manner to how they perceive it as being a pleasureful wish granted. It just makes you want to laugh and squirm simultaneously.
Aladdin is based off the original story called Arabian Nights. However, this is the dark story. This is the folklore. This is about the jinn, which resides, again, sort of like Pinhead, resides in between the worlds. And he hunts down human souls. He'll give you your wish, but in return, he takes your soul. And if he collects a certain amount of souls, he'll release hell on earth. Sort of like Hellraiser in a way. I don't think it's as classic as Hellraiser, but it's definitely up there as being memorable.
Oh, of course. And I think it's very subjective as to what deserves or is deemed as classic status. But, a lot of it has to do with what is influential, and a lot of it has to do with what is truly unique and original, because there could be great movies, but the concept's been done many times before or presented in a similar yet slightly different manner. Many slasher films are classics only in the fact that they've come out during a specific era, which could be deemed as a golden age, but looking deeper into it, it's only a very few handful of films from each era that can truly be described as innovative or as different or as truly standalone films.
In this film, it's a cameo movie. I mean, you got Robert Englund, you got Tony Todd, you have Chris Lemmon, You have, I don't remember his name, but he played the bum in Back to the Future. He was a bum in this film, too.
Yes.
It's pretty much a cameo movie, but it worked. And Wes Craven, of course, he's at the very beginning. I met Andrew Devoff, who portrayed the Djinn.
Oh, awesome.
I met him close to 10 years ago at one of the Chiller Theater conventions. And I said to him, you know, there's 4 films, but you were only in the first 2. What happened? He says, well, he can't really go into it because of contractual reasons. However, he was scheduled to do the 3rd film, but then something happened with the contract and he got dropped and he ended up doing another movie. But they used a mold from his face and they put on the actor in the 3rd movie. So if you watch the 3rd film, it looks like him because they were using his mold. And there was like this whole dispute. They went to court and everything.
Wow. That's something.
So that was a story on its own.
That's interesting.
Now I gotta mention Vincent Price. He's one of my favorite horror actors. God rest his soul.
Well, he was an iconic.
He was just amazing. He had this weird voice. The way he said his lines just sent chills up and down my spine. You could never really tell if he was being serious or he was joking, but you couldn't trust him. That's what it was. You just couldn't trust him.
He was an icon. He had a sinister aura about him. It was charming, yet you could tell he had that malevolence underlying that it just rubbed you the wrong way.
For his time, he had probably just as many roles as Morgan Freeman does for this generation.
Absolutely.
You know? And of course, one of the biggest ones, and one of my favorite movies for him is The House of Wax from 1953.
Oh, that's a classic. That's definitely one of his best movies. Up there with House on Haunted Hill, House of Wax is just one of those movies that you watch and it has an underlying dark humor to it that makes you chuckle as you see what's going on, but if you really think about it, if this happened in real life, you'd be like, what the
I mean, it's pretty sinister. I mean, here's a guy who supposedly, quote unquote, is wheelchair bound. He's a curator for a wax museum, but what we soon find out, spoilers, is that the wax figures are actually people that were killed and they were dipped in wax and they're posed in a specific position at the museum. Yeah,
I mean, it's a brilliant concept. I mean, and for its time period, it was very grotesque. I mean, even for nowadays, it holds up very well as a very macabre horror film.
What's interesting too is that Charles Bronson, at the time known as Charles Bukowski, this was one of his first films, and he was very young. I mean, very, very young, and is probably in his late 20s, if I had to guess.
Yeah. Who would have thought he'd go on to play Death Wish and become Paul Kersey?
Exactly. Wasn't he also passed up for the role as Snake Plissken in Escape from New York?
Yes, he was. He was passed up for the role because John Carpenter thought he looked too old and too rugged, so they chose Kurt Russell instead because they wanted a more younger, more suave character.
One film that I have to watch every year, and I'll watch all 7 films, I don't care. It's a really great franchise, A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm not going to say they got better as they went along, but the stories got more interesting. And Robert Englund is the only actor to portray Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street all the way up to Freddy vs. Jason. I don't recognize the new one with Jackie Haley. I don't recognize that one. I watched the first 10 minutes and I had to shut off. It just didn't grab me.
The Nightmare on Elm Street series is one of the more consistent franchises in the horror genre, and I'll explain why. You know, thinking about Friday the 13th, for example, Jason doesn't really come until the second film in Friday the 13th. In the first one, his mother is the killer. In the second movie, Jason doesn't have his iconic hockey mask. He's wearing a potato sack or a burlap sack over his head with his eye poked through.
And he has the axe, right?
Yep. And I have an unpopular opinion where I think the sack over his head is actually scarier than the hockey mask.
How do you figure?
It just looks creepy. It looks emotionless. It looks like there's nothing. It's just got the one eye poked through, and it just looks creepy as hell. And he's running really fast in that movie too. Like,
that's a good point.
Super fast, and like seeing that emerge from the woods with an axe like that actually gave me the creeps more than Jason walking like a zombie in some of the later films with his hockey mask and machete.
You know, there's actually a theory I watched on YouTube. The theory was, is Jason a teleporter? Because he likes to stalk his victims. And The second movie, like you just said, he runs, but in all the other movies, he stalks them. He doesn't even attempt to run. People just seem to fall or run into him.
Exactly. And also, the fifth movie, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, the killer is dressed as Jason, but it's not really Jason himself.
No.
So, the inconsistencies within the Friday the 13th genre are very jarring in some ways. The same with the Halloween movies. Now, back to the Halloween franchise, Halloween 3 Seasons of the Witch had nothing to do with Michael Myers. However, it was a brilliant film on its own right. But as they resurrected Michael Myers, Halloween 4 and Halloween 5, they seemed like they were sort of mediocre in a lot of ways. And then Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, it was good in its own way, but I felt like it was sort of irrelevant to the rest of the genre. Now, Halloween H2O, in my opinion, seemed like a Lifetime movie with Michael Myers involved.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Yeah.
And Halloween Resurrection, no comment, in my opinion.
No, let's just say...
That never happened.
What's his name? The rapper?
Busta Rhymes.
Busta Rhymes. All I gotta say is Busta Rhymes, that's it.
However, I consider Halloween Resurrection to be like the Batman and Robin of the horror genre.
Wow.
That's in my own opinion.
Okay.
But, I mean, if others disagree with me, feel free to, go on a tangent. But, back to Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger's always been very consistent in all the movies. His dialogue opened up much more in the third movie, The Dream Warriors, which I consider to be the best of the franchise, in my opinion. His dialogue got funnier and more humorous in the later films, such as The Dream Child and Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. But he's always had his iconic burnt face, his hat, his striped shirt, and his glove. There's always been that consistent theme running throughout where you know what you're going to get and you know the plot twists that are probably going to occur. However, it's done in such a way that is clever and brilliant that you're almost looking forward to see what Freddy's going to do next to his victims.
Now I'm going to give you a little trivia about how the character Freddy Krueger came about. When Wes Craven was little, him and his brother noticed that there was this bum that used to hang out near his house. And he had a scarred face, he had the brown fedora, he had like the nasty sweater and stuff. And they would see this guy a lot. So one night, Wes Craven goes downstairs and he looks through the window of his front door and he sees the bum there. So he runs back upstairs to get his brother. He comes back down, and this time the bum is even closer to his house. So he shuts the window, runs away. Then he comes back, and this time the bum's face is right there in the window, and it scared the crap out of him. And that's where they get the idea for how Freddy Krueger should look. So talking about Freddy Krueger and the nightmares and people dying in their sleep. That originated from something, right?
Yeah, it originated from a phenomenon called Asian Death Syndrome. Many refugees who fled countries like Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam during the early 70s would have very disturbing nightmares, and many of them were reported to have died in their sleep. And that concept was taken and developed into the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, where Freddy, this character, would be killing his victims in their sleep, while on the surface, in the waking world, these victims would be appearing to be dying of natural causes or of deaths that are unexplained by the naked eye.
Now, of course, couldn't be Halloween, or in the spirit of Halloween, without talking about the original George Romero's Night of the Living Dead.
Oh man, that film started it all. It pretty much started the whole zombie genre. It maybe wasn't the first, but it was definitely one that popularized and really blew the door off of the whole genre of zombie films.
I gotta say this though, for a film that came out in 1968, you can tell it was very low budget, and the makeup wasn't that great. But you have to think about it, because it's the early days of zombie movies. People were scared when they saw this. People wouldn't go to graveyards, and people would be like, "Oh, you want to go visit so-and-so?" I'm not going to the cemetery. No. It created this whole phobia, much like Hitchcock's phobia for people that didn't want to take showers anymore. I know what's going to happen to the main character, but every time I see it, it still shocks me, because through the whole movie, you're rooting for the protagonist. And then when the end finally comes, it's like so unexpected. You're like, oh, come on, are you serious? It's like, oh, you had so much hope for them too.
Yeah, but it's a very realistic movie too. I mean, with all the fantasy aside and the zombies aside, it has a starkly realistic element that not everything in life is going to have a happy ending. That yes, you're going to encounter things that may suck and that may be terrible, and that pretty much puts the exclamation point on the horror genre itself. That gives you that ending terror. That yes, there may be unanswered questions. Yes, there may be crimes unsolved, and yes, you may end up not having a happy ending. Another great film I'd like to mention is The Funhouse. It came out in 1981 and was directed by Tobe Hooper, who is well known for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, what did you think of the film, Steve?
I love The Funhouse. I remember owning it on VHS, and then I got the DVD. I can remember the first time I saw it, I was in Palmer Video. Now, I'm really aging myself now. Palmer Video back in the day was a couple blocks from my house, and they had a great assortment of VHS horror. That's actually where I found Hellraiser, too. And I saw The Funhouse one day. It had a clown on the cover. It's a really creepy clown. And I rented it, watched it. Don't remember much because I was small, but all I remember was being scared of this creature in the bottom of the funhouse, like the basement part of it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's such a classic because it doesn't rely on special effects. It's mostly practical effects.
Yes.
And it's
absolutely.
It is a slasher film, but it isn't a slasher film at the same time.
It definitely has a good element of comedy and horror. I feel like some of the parts that are scary have good jump scares and have some good disturbing, unsettling sensations. But there's many parts of it that made me chuckle. Like first of all, what are you doing in the middle of the night going into a haunted ride as a teenager? I mean, you're asking for trouble right there alone.
Yeah. Don't forget too. Wasn't it like a dare? Like, oh, let's stay the night. Let's stay the night.
Yeah, it was, and of course the girl wants to be all cool, getting with the older guy in high school, and of course there's that that puppy love that's involved there. So of course they're gonna resort to stupid acts like staying overnight in an amusement park that's apparently haunted, and of course they end up paying the price.
And Kevin Conway, very underrated actor, but at that time, remember seeing him in this film as the Barker. I always kept that line in my head over the years, and I can hear it. Just like I see the image of the Funhouse, and I can hear him, alive, alive, alive.
These are all creatures of God, ladies and gentlemen, not fans. They are authentic and they are alive. Alive, alive, alive.
It's one of those things that's always stuck with me. It's such a great movie. Terrifying, actually. If you're a teenager, I would say it's probably a terrifying movie. It could be a date movie too.
That definitely is true. I mean, I've watched it when I was older, so I just found it to be like campy and funny and scary. Kind of like in a similar way you'd watch many like 80s slasher films like April Fool's Day or like Sleepaway Camp or like even things like the later Friday the 13th movies. They they're going to have a few good startles here and there, but nothing viscerally scary or terrifying at this age anyway. You have to love the comic relief that they put in many horror films. Although when it's overdone, then it becomes more of a black comedy or just a dark comedy in itself, and which I certainly think has its place in cinema because I love films like Beetlejuice and Gremlins. Films that are funny and scary. The whole Tales from the Crypt series, which is just Creepshow. Yes, I mean, I think that dark humor and black comedy has its place throughout. But at the same time, I feel like in this day and age, we want something more. We want something much more psychologically, daunting. Something that's more viscerally scary from the inside out. So, hence the modern day torture films or a lot of the socially conscious horror films that tap into deeper issues that are, bringing out much deeper emotions and heated debates within people that watch them.
Well, Rob, I have to say that this was a very interesting podcast. I enjoyed talking to you.
It's an absolute blast every single time, and I had a great great time talking with you on some great horror movies and some of the collaborations we've worked on and some of the experiences we had at the convention.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since we've actually got to sit down and talk for, just in general. And because of this whole situation this year, it's not been easy.
Not at all.
But I do want to talk about the album that you actually just put out.
Yes, I released a new album with my project Cucurbitophobia. The title of the album is Dies Ferialis, Awakening the Lemurs, which is a thematic album about summoning ancient underworld Roman deities into a modern-day setting. These Roman deities inflict havoc, catastrophe, and destruction on modern-day humanity, leaving the world in wreck. Now, there's no lyrics on this album, as there's all dark, ambient, avant-garde, classical music influences throughout, creating an almost soundscape-like atmosphere. So it's almost as if you're creating your own horror movie in your own head as you're listening to the music. I was very much inspired by composers like John Carpenter and Schoenberg, Stravinsky, and even more modern-day prodigies like Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails while I was composing this album. It's the fifth album in the Cucurbitophobia catalog. It took a lot of work to put into this album because, being under quarantine for the last few months, I've had a lot to work with. At the same time, deadlines that I imposed on myself were much more strict, so I had to work fast as I was creating this album. I would suggest visiting my website, Cucurbitophobia.com, where you can find access to all of my product on physical CD and digital downloads through my Bandcamp site. You can stream everything through other digital streaming services and platforms, but I think it's good to buy directly through my website and through Bandcamp because I also offer exclusive releases through my Bandcamp site as well as bonus tracks that you will not be able to get on the traditional big company corporate digital streaming services.
I want to thank you so much for coming on to this podcast tonight. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for having me come along. I had an absolutely great time talking about these movies and catching up and comparing notes on what we've done and what we're continuing to do as creative individuals.
Tune into the next video that I will be posting very soon. This is NJMovieFreak out.